Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm John Dickerson in for Nora. Tonight, President Biden warns the world that we are closer to a nuclear conflict than at any point since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. The White House advised there is no new information that Russia is planning an imminent nuclear attack on Ukraine, but the president's remarks demonstrate that the U.S. is taking Vladimir Putin's threats seriously, especially as events continue to turn against him in Ukraine. Russia's military continues to lose ground, and Russia is losing military-age men as they flee the country to avoid the draft. Putin has repeatedly reminded the West that nuclear weapons are one of his options in Ukraine. Major Garrett will start us off tonight from the White House. Good evening, Major.
Good evening, John. A midterm election is coming, and voter concern about stability and continuity in times of crisis might emerge as an issue. Even so, experts we talked to said the risk of Russia using a nuclear weapon in Ukraine is higher, in no small measure because senior Russian leaders have said they reserve the right to use their most dangerous weapons, and they're not bluffing. President Biden ignored questions on his way to a speech in Maryland this morning after warning in stark terms of possible nuclear annihilation. We have not faced the prospect of Armageddon since Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis, the president said at a private fundraiser. I don't think there's any such thing as the ability to easily use a tactical nuclear weapon and not end up with Armageddon. Mr. Biden said Russian President Vladimir Putin, having sustained multiple military setbacks in Ukraine, has no clear endgame. Where does he find a way out? Where does he find himself where he does not only lose face, but significant power? Putin has warned recently he might use weapons of mass destruction. The White House said today there is no new intelligence suggesting Russia is taking steps to deploy battlefield nuclear weapons in Ukraine.
Does this feel like hype to you from the president?
Well, I just think it's unwise more than hype.
H.R. McMaster served as national security advisor to President Trump.
It kind of plays right into Putin's hands. You know, this is all Putin can do now is rattle his nuclear saber. And I think he has to know that if he uses a nuclear weapon, the consequences would be unbearable for him.
In an interview with the BBC, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said talk of nuclear warfare should startle the world.
They don't know if they will use or they will not use. I think that it's dangerous even to speak about it.
Putin is leading the world to the precipice of a nuclear war.
Mike McCall is the top Republican on the House Foreign Affairs Committee.
I think every nation in the United Nations needs to warn Putin this will not be tolerated, including the nations that have stayed on the sidelines.
In this tense atmosphere, the Biden administration announced this week it was purchasing larger quantities of a drug used to treat patients in case of a nuclear or radiological emergency. The Department of Health and Human Services said this move was part of an ongoing and, quote, long-planned, unquote, preparation strategy. John?
Major Garrett at the White House. Thank you, Major.